Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of In the Pit with Lobo Tiggre. Our victim of the day is Jason Simpson. He's the CEO of Orla Mining. You may or may not have heard of Orla, but if you've read my past work, you've probably heard of their flagship project called Camino Rojo in Mexico, which we made a lot of money on in the past when a company called Canplatz, CPQ, sold it to Goldcorp. Now it's in Orla's portfolio, and they have a lot more going on. So Jason, why don't you give us the 35,000-foot overview, and we'll get into some questions.
Sure. Thanks, Lobo. Orla has over 10 million ounces of resources in two countries, Mexico and Panama. Surrounding those 10 million ounces, we have 215,000 hectares of concessions to explore. Both countries already have very robust projects designed, and Orla will start by developing the oxide portion of our Camino Rojo project in Mexico. It's a simple open pit heap leach project that only requires a modest $125 million in capital and a year to construct. It will deliver an average annual production rate of over 100,000 ounces a year and a 25% rate of return. So that's a good starter project with great exploration potential for a company stacked with industry veterans.
Okay, well that's a great overview. And I didn't think of this before, but just listening to your quick summary, a 1-year construction, that's pretty short. The low capital suggests very easy build. Do you have a payback number on how long till we pay back the initial capital?
Yeah, it'll be 3 years to pay back on a 7-year mine life.
7-year mine life. Okay, and this is the oxide portion of a much larger deposit we all know and love, Camino Rojo, which brings to mind the obvious question, Jason, if you don't mind. If this was any good, why would Goldcorp sell it back to anybody? They bought it and now they're giving it away. I mean, not giving it away, but explain that to us.
Sure. So keep in mind the agreement we made with Goldcorp. They have their Penasquito operation, which is nearly 50 kilometers away from our Camino Rojo project, and Penasquito is full for the next decade, which makes the current NPV for a large sulfide open pit less attractive for Goldcorp. So letting us strip the oxide portion of it in the meantime with optionality on the sulfides enables them to participate in our equity upside and wait, which I think is a reasonable strategy.
Okay, so just to be clear, you're not saying they only sold you the oxide. They sold you the whole kit and caboodle, but they, as I remember, they bought into your company as well, so they have an equity stake and they have an option to claw back in, or just a thought to buy back in the future if they want to?
Exactly. So we own 100% of the oxides, and Goldcorp retains optionality for the sulfide portion of it. So the 10 million ounces, 9.7 in Mexico that we discuss, includes the sulfide and oxide portion. For the oxide portion, which we propose to develop over the next 2 years, we have in situ ounces of 1 million and up to 1.7 million if we can get an agreement with Fresnillo.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I remember very clearly when this discovery was happening, when Canplatz was drilling it off, those beautiful fences, row after row of long intercepts, that stopped right at the border with Fresnillo, your immediately adjacent neighbors to the north there. And I was wondering about that. You have 1 million ounces. Is all of that yours? None of it's, or let me rephrase, is all of that mineable, or is some of it left in the ground because you can't push your pit too close to their property line?
Yeah, it's often something that I have to describe to people to make sure that they understand. In 2018, we published a PEA that described a project, the project we've been talking about, of 1 million ounces in situ that delivers that 25% rate of return that is 100% on Orla-owned concession. There is an upside, as you've described, if we can obtain an agreement with our neighbors to the north, Fresnillo, of obtaining more, another 700,000 ounces of resources at depth entirely on our concession. And as you expect and as you described in the drilling, there's also resources on the Fresnillo side of the concession. So we continue discussions with Fresnillo, which are very well advanced. Both sides understand the economic benefits to each other And we're hopeful that we can reach an agreement with Fresnillo to improve the economics of our oxide project. But to be clear, the entire project that was outlined in the PEA, of which the feasibility is currently based upon, is on our concession and will be constructed with or without an agreement with Fresnillo.
Okay, I understand. So, here we have the Fresnillo border. You're going to have a pit up next to it. There's only a certain distance you can get close to there, and there's an angle of the pit wall, and that 700,000 ounces is right here beneath the pit wall and the border with Fresnillo. Is that right?
Yeah. So exactly as you've shown us in your mining engineering hands there. Yes, we have a pit that's currently designed in what we call a constrained case that stops at the Fresnillo concession. We have, although not published, also designed a pit that would go into the Fresnillo concession, considering all of the material on their side as waste, essentially a pushback, which will enable us to access more material at depth on our concession. So all of the economics that we've looked at, both the base case and an unconstrained case, consider material only on our concession.
Sure. And so, we don't know. You may know if you've signed a CA. You don't have to say anything. We don't know what's on the other side of that wall with Fresnillo, not really wall, but the divider in the ground. But it would be very unlikely for nature to have stopped depositing the gold in a vertical line at a map line in the future, So, that 1.7 million could easily be 2 million or more. I'm doing the arm waving here, not you. But what is the probability that Fresnillo will want to make a deal with you? They have, very high-grade operations of their own in the area. They have high-priority projects like the Mag Silver JV, super high-grade. How important is a bulk tonnage oxide pit and a, secondary asset to them? And how likely is that for you guys to be able to make a deal with them?
It's a good question. An understanding of that you need to understand the oxide material that is on both sides of the fence. So clearly our companies know that. And in a scenario where they don't have an oxide mine on their side or on their concession, they would recognize that monetization of any oxide material on their concession would be enabled through an agreement with us as we intend to develop our Camino Rojo oxides. So I think with all of the information that we each have, we know that a deal is the best way to monetize the oxide portion of resources on both concessions. But what's also important to Fresnillo, as you would appreciate, is them being able to retain, any potential future sulfide project rights that they currently have. So our discussions with Fresnillo would have and needed to include a discussion about the sulfide pit with a company the size of Fresnillo, and then their previous discussions with a company the size of Goldcorp. That would be the foundation for those discussions. So we have made it clear to them that Orla only proposes an agreement at this stage related to the oxide portion. And we will delay conversation to a future date for a discussion about the sulfide portion of the development, at which point we can understand what agreement we could come to related to the sulfides.
All right, let's come back to the sulfides in a minute. Let's say they decide, okay, we have other things, we're busy, but you guys can build this oxide, we'll let you on our side, and you guys build the oxide mine there, and we'll take a piece of that for letting you, have access. Would you be able to do that? Do you have the people on board to build a mine? Building a mine, running a mine is a very different thing from discovering a deposit.
Yeah. So I just came from Torex Gold Resources, and we just constructed, ramped up the second largest gold mine in Mexico. So I'm comfortable leading this team to build the oxide project in Mexico. And as we develop that, we'll gain an understanding of the sulfides on both concessions. And expect that we'll have a future discussion with Fresnillo about the development of a larger sulfide project if it's in the best interest of both companies. But to answer your question, we can move forward with the construction of the oxide portion. We'd like to enhance the economics in an agreement with Fresnillo, which will create benefits to both companies. And there is no concern with their ability to develop either the oxide or the sulfide projects.
Okay, so you say you just came from Torex. What was your position there? What did you do?
Yeah, so let's back up a little further than that, Lobo. And I'm a professional mining engineer. I've been in the business for over 20 years, designing, building, and operating mines. The last project I was involved with is the El Limon Guajes development, which occurred in Mexico for a company called Torex Gold Resources. I just left there at the end of last year, and they announced production results from last year of 354,000 ounces. So that puts them number 2 for 2018 on the list of gold mining projects in Mexico. That construction was $800 million construction over 3 years, with another year to ramp it up. So that's a pretty sizable construction. Prior to that, I worked for Vale at Voisey's Bay, running a different commodity, but a world-class deposit in Labrador, Canada.
Very good. And so that's interesting that you have experience not just building a gold mine, but in the same jurisdiction. Mexico can be tricky, different places, but you've been there, you've done it, and presumably you know the people in the ministries, even people that you would hire potentially to help you with the build.
Yeah, I spent 6 years with Torex. I started with them in January of 2013, and that experience gives me a lot of opportunity to help Orla in many different things I expect. Certainly contacts within government, regulators, people in the country that can aid with construction and operation are all things that I bring to Orla with me. I'm very appreciative of people like Chuck Jeunesse, George Albino, Pierre Lassonde, supporters and board directors of Orla, having the confidence in me to lead Orla.
Sure, well, that makes sense. It was Pierre that introduced or reintroduced me to this story and got this conversation going. So, yeah, it's good to have that backing. It's not specific to your company. I wasn't going to bring this up, but since you bring up your experience and connections, I was going to ask, do you have a quick take on the AMLO scare, as it were? Mexico is an interesting enough place, but now we have this change in administration that has a lot of investors concerned. What would you say to them about that?
Yeah, AMLO has a tough job ahead of him. He has in Moreno, a coalition government of a number of different interests that he's going to need to manage over his 6-year term. The connection to mining that obviously I had a head start on at Torex and bring with me to Orla, I don't think creates any fear for what I would describe as responsible mining companies. The things that AMLO is speaking about, the ambitions that he has for his government, are consistent with what certainly a Canadian mining company would need to do in any international setting. Creating opportunities in areas where mining is conducted is entirely consistent with what mining companies would do in any case. So I don't see any threat to mining. I have not, in fact, heard any concerns related to taxes increasing. I have heard commitments from the government that they will not increase. So those are the types of things that mining companies would pay attention to. Being responsible is something that they can rely upon us to take care of ourselves. We will need to be cognizant of the fact that the other changes that the government may wish to make could impact mining things like diesel fuel supply and other changes that they're embarking upon could create some collateral effect that we'll need to be cognizant of. But in terms of Orla's understanding of that, we will complete the feasibility study this year. We will get our financing package in place this year, and we'll get the permits in place this year. Only 2 of those happen in Mexico. The other things are happening outside of Mexico. So we have a year to understand where this administration is going and how it could affect our project construction. Permitting is one thing that happens within the country that we'll need to make sure we keep an eye on. And we've made sure that our project schedule has sufficient time to give the new administration an opportunity to get up to speed on the file and improve our permits. But as you stated earlier, I'm clear on who we need to work with, which agencies, and our team is doing the permitting work that would be required and shouldn't create any schedule disruptions.
Okay, fair enough. And I'm not going to ask you to crystal ball the political future of Mexico. You know, it is what it is. We'll see what happens, but it's good to see that you're already up and running there. Let's go back to the mine for a moment.
Sure.
The oxide portion that we're talking about, as you say, starter, the bigger picture has always been the larger amount of gold in the sulfide below at depth. But that's a big project, and I'm wondering, is the profit, the cash flow, never mind NPV, but the cash thrown off by the oxide project, is that enough to pay for building the bigger mine if you had to go it alone?
Well, certainly the advancement, construction of the oxide project will aid the advancement of the sulfide project, and that'll be one option that Orla has in the next few years. The cash generated from that oxide mine could fund the construction of the sulfide mine. But with the assets that we have, the team that we have, and the support that Orla has, I anticipate we'll have a number of strategic options in front of us over the next 2 years. And the cash generated by the oxide mine in Mexico will be deployed depending on what options we have in front of us. The sulfide project, certainly a large one.
Sure. Well, it's kind of hard to imagine that little Orla would be allowed to build a major mine like that right on the border of a major producer like Fresnillo. If it gets to that point, again, I'm not going to ask you to say anything that's not public, but I would be surprised if you didn't have a takeover bid either from your neighbors or from the sellers who see the mine coming online. Anyway, that's my comment, not yours. But about the sulfide, you have a great big sulfide deposit, but the trick is always the metallurgy with these things. And some of them are refractories, some of them you have to work really hard to get the gold out. But presumably Goldcorp would have done a fair amount of work on this. What can you tell us about the metallurgy?
Okay, so on the metallurgy is good. It's been well studied by Goldcorp, as you would expect. And it has some things that are similar to Penasquito in that it has some pyrite encapsulation. And that's why our neighbors have built a new pyrite leach plant. So when the time comes for us to conduct our own additional metallurgical work and begin to design the sulfide project, we'll make sure that we resurface all of that previous work and conduct our own to design a plant that is suitable for the Camino Rojo sulfides. Back to your takeover question, I came to Orla to build a mining company, and you do that by building and acquiring mines. I just led the construction of the second largest gold mine in Mexico. So yes, we have ambitions to build Orla into a mining company, but in the end, it's the shareholders that will decide, and certainly appreciate the fact that as we have success at Orla, that will potentially lead to takeover possibilities for the company, at which point the shareholders will decide.
Sure. Well, assuming that there's no deal with Fresnillo or anybody else for the time being, you build your oxide project on your own. You mentioned some of the things that you have on tap for this year. So what's the timeline there? you have the feasibility study complete, you've got money to raise. How long before we get to a construction decision, and what are the other deliverables you see in the year ahead?
Sure. So I'll outline the deliverables in Mexico, and at the same time, I'll take my opportunity to remind you of Panama because we have some work to do down there as well.
I was getting to that.
So
go ahead.
Let's start with Mexico. At Camino Rojo, we have 6 key deliverables in 2019. We have our water concessions are in place, and we are drilling the water wells to support construction and eventual production from our oxide project. The feasibility study will be done mid-year this year, and at that point, we'll present to the board and gain approval for construction of the oxide project in 2020. We need to enable that. We'll need to have permits in place by the end of the year, and we'll need to have a financing package in place by the end of the year. In the midst of those 4 things, we also need to continue exploration on that large land package that we have in Mexico, and we'll need to prepare for construction. Having just been through a large construction, I can tell you that there's a number of things that we'll need to have in place at the end of this year to enable a good launch in 2020 so that we can be producing gold in 2021 in Mexico. Meanwhile, in Panama, we need to continue exploration. We've recently had some discovery there of copper gold, in addition to the oxides that we acquired when we purchased the assets in Panama. So we're excited for both the prospect of finding additional oxides to increase the size of that project, but also potentially put together a resource package for what we've been discovering in the Caballito deposit as greater than 1% copper and ½ gram per ton gold. So we'll continue to explore in Panama. We need to get the resource updates out, as well as we'll need to keep our information up to date so that project is queued up as the next in construction. Remember, I described to build a mining company, we need to build mines. So Panama will be the next one in the queue as it stands right now.
Sure. I'm less familiar with Cerro Quema. I'm guessing most of our viewers probably are too. Can you describe a little bit what's on tap there? What kind of project is it? And what's the expectation, I guess, or hope for the exploration? Are we just defining it around the edges? Is there potential to double the resource? How early, how advanced is it?
Yeah, it's very well studied. And similar to Mexico, it is also open pit heap leach oxide project. The resources or reserves in the case of Panama, because it's had some additional study, are a bit smaller than our Camino Rojo project. So we'd like to add to those oxides, so about 500,000 ounces there. So we'd like to add to those resources prior to getting into construction in Panama. But it has been well studied and permitted, with the permit submissions being put into the government some time ago. So that project is only next in the queue because of capital availability. Once we have Camino Rojo up and running, we'll have access to additional capital as well as our own cash flow to construct Cerro Quema. The other exciting part of Cerro Quema is the prospect of copper in a country that in fact today is having a ceremony to the north of us for first ore at First Quantum's asset, Copa Panama. So we'll continue to explore down there. We'll keep our studies and numbers up to date so that we're ready to go when the time comes in Panama.
Well, if Cerro Quema is already permitted and it's smaller, why not build that one first?
So it's a bit smaller, and the permits are submitted in Panama, but not yet approved. So we would need to gain government approval to construct that. But also in Mexico, we still need to submit for the permits and gain approval there. So they're really at this similar stage of the permitting process. We're excited about Mexico, not the least of which my experience in constructing in Mexico, because of the size of it. It's also, if you've seen pictures of the site, going to be a simple construction. Cerro Quema in Panama, a reasonably simple construction as well. The exciting part of Mexico is we have a team on the ground. We have a very robust project. The permitting is well known to myself and to the team, and one of our largest shareholders also happens to have a processing plant 50 kilometers away. So that's why it's first in the queue. If capital was in a different capital markets were in a different place, I propose that Orla may be ambitious enough to take on 2 small open pit heap leach projects, but we'll be modest in our capital in today's environment, and get going with one and follow it up with Panama.
That would be pretty aggressive. Honestly, that would make me nervous. You have a great track record, but taking on 2 projects, 2 different countries,
Sure.
Boy, that's really taking it to another level of complexity. So I'm happy to see you focus on what does seem like the lowest hanging fruit there. All right, good deliverables. It sounds like plenty of news flow on tap. What does all that work cost, and how much do you have in the bank?
Yeah, we have about 15 million in the bank, which is sufficient for the feasibility study we need to do this year on the permitting. It will result in modest exploration spending until we have a financing package in place, which we hope to have by year end. And that will fund construction as well as allow us to continue exploration.
Okay, very good. So no fear of immediate financing going back to the trough anytime soon. All right, the one last obnoxious question I always ask everybody is, how much skin do you have in the game? If you're going to ask investors to put their money into it, how much of your own have you put into this?
Sure. So as it shows in our presentation deck on our website, orlamining.com, management and directors have about 7%. And most of us are new to the company, particularly our CFO and myself as a CEO. And so it was part of our incentives to join. Another example of skin in the game is Pierre Lassonde, who has a considerable amount of his own money invested in the company. And as the company grows, I expect our personal investment in it will grow as well. I only invest in mining companies that I'm a part of leading because it's my job to deliver results in them. When the share price reflects the accomplishments of the company, we benefit alongside of the shareholders. And I respect the importance of that alignment. My kids and I are pretty healthy shareholders in Torex, and I expect we'll be healthy shareholders in Orla as I continue to increase my personal investment in our company.
Okay, well, you've been a good sport. Thank you for answering my questions. Interesting story. We will be keeping an eye on you. Good luck.
Thanks, Lobo. Take care.